Hey all, thanks for coming on out for tonight. We have some amazing talks set up for you. And how many of you is this is your first product tank that you're coming to? Alex, I know that's not true. So someone has asked me earlier, and I gave this estimate, but I think it's always true. Every product tank, 80% of the people are new. That either means the last one is really bad and they don't come back, or we just have this many people in Austin interested in product and we just haven't totally reached the entire market. So definitely be sure to let people know about Product Tank if you enjoyed tonight. If you didn't enjoy tonight, please don't tell them, tell me. That way we can fix it. So let's take a look. So this is what we're going to be doing today. You just mingled, grabbed food and a drink, and now you just took a seat. So we can check that off. Introductions and housekeeping, we're going to do that. We're going to have 3 talks. At the end of the 3 talks, if everybody obeys their time limits, we're going to have a panel Q&A, which means I'm going to need chairs up. We'll pull it up there for the Q&A, where you can ask your questions. And then we'll have a little bit of mingling and networking until we're kicked out. But that's generally what we're going to do. So what is Product Tank? How many of you have heard of Product Tank before? I mean, before you actually decided to come to this one. Okay, still. Okay, cool. So Product Tank started in 2010 in London, of all places. And, started off there and kind of grew and grew. It's kind of the organization club type of meetup thing out of the Mind the Product training and things like that. So we are the free meetups that go around the world. We are now in over 185 different cities. So if you can name a city, there's probably a Product Tank there, probably. And we're well over 50,000 members who are going to these meetups, so a lot of us. So we're not so lonely now. We started this one in, when was it? It was like 3 years ago, 2 years ago, something like that. So there are meetups for product people, put on by product people, so if you didn't know, I am a product person. And they're informal, and they're for not just product managers, right? Though, how many of you are product managers? Okay, most of you. Product owners? Okay, 1. Data people? Okay, another 1 and 2. Design-oriented, I throw user experience in with that as well. Okay, so there's some of you. So those of you who are the lesser people, not that you're lesser people, but you didn't lesser to raise their hands, bring your friends, because whether you're a UX researcher, or a designer, whatever, if you work in products and you think about products and product strategy, this is a meetup that is for you. It's not just product managers. So, what do we do? So we're networking only, lunches and happy hours. So we do have happy hours every other month. And on months that we don't do anything, like December, we'll probably have some regional meet for lunch or something. We have informal events with 2 to 3 speakers to get the conversation started, and then networking and discussions. No sales pitches. And so, we have people who are talking about what they do at their companies, case studies and things like that. But they're not here to sell you the product. They're usually here to tell you what they did wrong. And hopefully how they fixed it. Oh, not always how they fixed it. It's just learn from me, don't ever do that. So we have a Slack community. How many of you are not on the Slack community? Oh, that's so sad. You should join our Slack community. It's very simple, productinaustin.com. You go there, there's a button say join Slack community. You click it, you enter your email, it'll send you an invite. You can join our Slack community, and it is so awesome, let me tell you. Because on the Slack community, we have job postings, and we have a lot of conversations and more job postings and people networking about jobs. So if you're looking for a job, that's a good place to go. Who here is actually looking for a job now that's willing to say so? Okay, raise it up higher. Higher, 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 higher. So proves my point, most people come to these network meetings because they're looking for something, which is fine. How many of you are hiring or your company is hiring? Okay, I want you to stand up actually. Because there's fewer of you. Stand up, I know, it's embarrassing. Okay, so I want you to say really quick your company and what roles you're hiring for, just so that people can meet with you after the networking, okay? So, starting with you.
Verbo and multiple product roles.
Verbo, tons of product. Accruent?
We are in all kind of jobs.
Tons of roles, okay? And we have a recruiter over here, and she's going to speak very soon. So we'll get to you, sorry. But you can speak. Yeah, you want to speak?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk on behalf of Accruent. So, Erin Johnson, I work in talent acquisition on our product management side. So we have opportunities from an associate level product manager, senior product manager, and then also a manager, so a people manager as well. So if you're interested.
And you would get lovely cafeteria and spaces like this every day. And in the domain, where you can get all other cool stuff. So, anyone else? Did I miss anyone? Okay, so be sure to network with these people afterwards if you're looking for a role, because they'll help. Join Slack. We have job channels for junior, mid-level, senior, and management and remote. And we also have channel Job Club where you can kind of like talk about jobs in Austin. And we are starting up a new meetup, yet another product meetup. It's called Product Job Club. It's coming in 2020. It is on Meetup now, so you can actually go and sign up for it now. You'll be given information about upcoming events relatively soon. Okay. So, yeah, who actually tweets anymore except Trump? I mean, you can volunteer. We're always needing volunteers. Speakers. I don't believe we're doing any more talks this year. Next month we have a happy hour in December. We just tend to do nothing. But next year we're going to be looking for speakers, and so please submit if you have a topic. We tend to do themes, and so if your topic aligns with a theme we want to do, or maybe your topic is actually a theme, that's something that we want to create a theme around, right? So definitely do that. Organizers. We are also looking for new organizers to join the current organizers, to kind of do some, give some people a break. And to bring in some fresh meat. And so, yeah, that was the last one. I could try both. Yeah, there we go. Anyways, so if you're interested in organizing, reach out to me or Alex, who is also an organizer. I can also talk really loud. Okay. So, also, Accruent was really awesome for sponsoring the food today in the venue. Awesome. And so, definitely, we are always looking for people to sponsor food and drinks and things like that, but also venues. It's actually quite hard to find venues for these events. So, if you're interested, if you think your company might be interested, if you might be able to convince them, please let myself or Alex or one of the organizers know. Okay. Yeah, talks for next year, submit it. You can ask me that. Our next event is a happy hour. It is on November 19th. It's at HEB Favor Digital Headquarters. I don't know what the big name is. It's really big. It's already up on our meetup page. You can RSVP for it. You will need to RSVP, otherwise they will not let you in the building. They're very security oriented at HEB. And but we're going to have a profile pic photo shoot. We're going to do mingling. We're going to be networking party. This is our holiday party because let's throw Thanksgiving in there with it. Why not, right? And so RSVP on our meetup page. This is a mega party. And what I mean by that is we have 5 or 6 different product organizations here in town, and we actually do collaborate together sometimes. And what we're doing is we're trying to throw a big happy hour where we're combining everyone. So what I ask is just if you RSVP on our site, RSVP on only ours. That way, when you go to RSVP, we have an accurate count. You don't need to RSVP on multiple different sites. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Accruent, do you want to say something else? Come on up.
Okay. So, yeah, just I guess echoing what Erin said, but I want to say welcome to everybody. Welcome to all the guests, and then thank you for coming, ProductTank organizers, and then for our 3 speakers, thank you so much for being here. Product strategy is a very exciting topic for all of us. And then do want to kind of welcome you to Accruent and tell you a little bit about who we are. We do physical resource management for a lot of our organizations, and that's across several industries: healthcare, retail, higher ed, telecom, and we do that with a bunch of product suites. That's the capital planning, project planning, lease management, work order management, document management, and we do that across the world. We do have Brazil, the UK, Amsterdam, etc. So that requires a very large product management force across all our offices. This is our headquarters. We have New Orleans, we have Amsterdam, which I mentioned, we have Newcastle, UK. And you would be doing anything from roadmap activities, working with development, of course, marketing, sales, support. But what we've been passionate about for the last year or so has been voice of the customer and getting that a little bit more formalized within the company. We have customer advisory boards and making sure we do something called a PD sprint, where we're talking to our customers first, figuring out their pain points. So that's a lot of what you could foresee here at Accruent. And then echoing what Aaron said, just looking, if you're looking for something that's a little bit of what you could do, all of us with Accruent are wearing a star with us, so you can talk to us after the event. But thank you so much for coming, and again, thanks for the speakers. I'm looking forward to it.
It always happens. Okay. Anyways, okay, loud again. So tonight we have count them, three presentations. We don't just have one. The other meetups will have one. But for us, you'll get three. Okay, so the first one is continuous collaboration, the Flywheel of Product Strategy. That's hard to say. From Reza Shirazi. Where's Reza? Okay. There, okay, he's over there. The second one is What Road Will Your Product Strategy Take You by Tanja Horan. Horan? Okay, over there. I should try this, practice this before. And then the third one is using vision-led product management to build the right product. Rajesh Nerlikar? Nerlikar. Okay, over there. So they're all over here. So, and then we're going to do a panel. So before we start, everybody have the drinks and pizza because we are running a little bit early, which is great, but you know, don't tell that to the speaker. Anyone? Drinks? Pizza? Okay, any questions so far about ProductTank? We're doing good. You're all awake. Okay, sounds great. Okay, well, then let's move forward.
Yeah. I'm gonna take the chance and not use the mic. If I'm not speaking loud enough, just whoever's in the back, just wave. Speak louder. Okay, I'll speak louder. All right. I'm Reza Shirazi. Great to have all of you out here. I always say when I see folks come up to a meetup is that you're taking the time out of your personal life to make your career better, and that's a big step. So I commend you for doing that. It's awesome to see all of you out here. Thanks for coming. So a little bit about me. I'm a senior product manager at AffiniPay. AffiniPay is a payment technology company that focuses on helping professionals get paid. I also have an online publication called Austin Voice of Product, where I interview product leaders and share their insights to help us build a stronger product community in Austin. So it's great to see all of you guys here because I really believe in community. I also have a bi-weekly newsletter where I share that interview. I share all the product events going on in Austin, as well as other things that are going on in the product community. So if you'd like to sign up for my newsletter, you can see that link up there. And you can sort of get that every 2 weeks. All right. So, so the topic, before I get into this, let me just my preamble. So there's a lot that is talked about product strategy, about the process of product strategy and how to do roadmaps and all of that. What I'm going to focus on is the human aspect of product strategy, the human aspect of product management, because that comes out of my own pain. There are two other speakers after me that are going to talk very well about how to develop product strategy and how to develop product vision and how to do that effectively. But I'm going to focus on the human aspect because what I found was you could be doing all this process really good and have a great roadmap tool and define it really well and have a crisp strategy. But the really hard part of doing product well is collaborating. It's really challenging, and that's what I'm going to focus on in this talk about how do you do that effectively so that you can have a good product strategy and then have product success. So I'll start with defining product strategy. So strategy, very simply, is how do you win? And I will say that product strategy is how do you align an organization around a product and a market so that you can win. So before we even talk about product strategy, I talked about getting an organization aligned around a product and market to win. That's the really challenging part of product management, is how do you get all these different groups that you work with aligned? You have sales and marketing and operations and finance. All of them can go in different directions and have different ideas of what this product should be doing, or what they should be saying to the market, or what they should be doing with customers. That could really make it difficult for you to have focus that enables you to be successful. So let me give a couple examples of that. So I work at AffiniPay. We are broadly two markets and very different ones. One is professionals, which is focused on lawyers and CPAs, and the other is associations, which are like the American Heart Association, the YMCA, nonprofits and what have you. And those are two very different markets and very different go-to-market strategies, very different ways that you're going to support them, very different ways that you're going to market to them, a very different sales motion. For example, for professionals, we have a very direct sales motion where we're calling them and they're signing up with us because they're smaller organizations. And with associations, we have a channel, we have partners that get associations to us. So they're very different. And so being very focused on what those markets are is really important, and aligning your organization about how you do that is really critical. So how do you actually get that alignment? And this is the life of a product manager, is alignment requires collaboration. You're spending a lot of time in meetings, talking to people, talking to users, interacting with these different teams, because product management really is a team sport. And I think those of you that are product managers in here are nodding your heads, yeah, it's a team sport. You don't do that alone. You can't do it individually. You have to do it with these other teams. And it requires a lot of collaboration. So how, the outcome of collaboration, if you're doing collaboration effectively, is you get these teams aligned. If you're connected to these teams, if you're collaborating well with them, if you understand them well, then everyone understands what's happening with the product, how you're going to market, how you should be talking to customers, how it should be marketed, how it should be sold. All of that then turns into a successful product. Well, so the challenge here is how do you collaborate effectively? And that's what I'm going to focus this talk on. And I have a model that's called continuous collaboration, which I'm going to talk about and focus on various aspects over here to help us figure out what's the most effective way for us to interact with these teams and collaborate so that we have success. So on the left, you see teams that you're interacting with. In the middle is what I call the trust flywheel, and I will talk a little bit more about that on future slides. And on the right, you see some success that's coming out of all of that, an outcome of it. So the first thing I'm going to spend time talking about is flywheel and why that's an effective metaphor for this collaboration. Then I'll talk some about trust and why that's a really critical part of collaboration. And then I'll come back to talking about the teams and how the spokes of the flywheel really help you effectively collaborate and interact with them. So flywheel is defined, it's a mechanical device, and some of you that are mechanically inclined probably have encountered this word. What a flywheel is, the definition of it efficiently stores energy. It smooths out the delivery of power from a power source. It is used to increase a machine's momentum. So if you think about it from a product management standpoint, we've been talking about alignment. So aligning a team so that you can gain momentum for your product success. And that's why I use this metaphor of flywheel, is if you're effectively collaborating and aligning that team, you gain that momentum, and everyone's sort of going in the right direction so that you can have success. So that's the model I have up there. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is how, is trust. A really important aspect of collaboration is building trust with these teams. I'm going to talk about 4 ways that you can build trust and give you examples of how to do that. So the first one is really simple, which is consistency. Show up and do what you say. And I think that's a really a fundamental part of being a product manager is that you tell people what you're going to do, you better follow through on it and be consistent in delivering. And that could be from very simple things, to showing up at a sales call when you're committed to doing it, to delivering on your roadmap and meeting up, a large commitment. So it's a small thing, it's the big things, but consistency is really kind of a fundamental way that you're building trust with the teams. The second one is credibility. Do your homework. So as a product manager, people want to see you as an authority. They want to see you as knowing what you're talking about. And a good example that I can use is one of my colleagues that I work with, Vinay. He's been working on an ACH product, and ACH is a way of transferring money. And it's a very, very complicated, a lot of arcane rules around it. But when he first started sort of working on this feature, he took this really big, thick book and went all the way through it to understand it. And now he's the expert of the organization about ACH. People come to him to ask him about it. And that's sort of building credibility by doing your homework. You really understand what you're talking about, and people start to trust, you know what you're talking about, you know what you're saying, we believe you, we will, you start building that trust. The next one is transparency. Share your work early and often. A lot of what you're doing as a product manager might seem arcane to others. You're down there doing something, and people are like, I don't know what those product managers do. So you got to be sharing what you do and doing it early and often. And I'll use an example. A friend of mine who works in another organization, Nicole. She was talking about that there are a lot of requests that come from the sales team, and they never had a process for how they took those requests and followed through on them. And she wanted to share with them how they actually took those requests and did something with them and shared back to them, meeting that commitment and being transparent about it. So they came up with a process for, these requests are not just going into a black box and somewhat happening and no one knows actually what happens with it, but coming up with, hey, we're being transparent, your requests are coming in, we're doing something with these, we're not doing anything with these, and here are the results of it. And that helped build trust with the sales organization, and they continue to interact with the product team to share more feedback. And I think that's a really critical part of collaborating with a sales team that's talking to prospects and customers. The last one, I think, is kind of the riskiest, which is vulnerability. I just said that you need to be an authority, right? You need to know what you're talking about. You need to be seen as knowing everything. But I think a critical part of collaboration, a critical part of building trust is sometimes just acknowledging that you don't know. And these are questions that you can ask or you can state when you're in the midst of collaboration. Something like, I don't have all the answers, because sometimes you don't. And acting like you do is not the good thing. Or poke some holes in this. Like you're putting an idea out there and saying, hey, what do you guys think of this? And getting some input for that. That's creating some trust and collaboration. And the last one is, what ideas do you have? Because you shouldn't be the only ones that are having ideas. And I think a great example of this is, when I first started working with a tech lead earlier in my product career, I thought I had to come to that knowing everything, and realized very quickly that that kind of blocked our collaboration. Like, I had to know everything, and they thought that I would know everything. Well, there was no dialogue there. It was like, writing requirements and throwing them over the fence and hoping that something was done with it. And the easiest way to build trust and collaboration with them was, hey, I'm not sure, I'm going to draw some stuff up here. What do you think? And that led to a lot of conversation, a lot of dialogue, and actually a better solution. And over time, you start building that trust, not just with engineers. It might be with designers. It might be with a marketing team. How should we message this? I'm not sure. Let's talk it through. Let's come up with the best way. So building trust through vulnerability, although that seems just completely alien to someone, like a product manager, is really critical to being successful in working with those teams. All right, so we've talked about building trust. An outcome of trust is what I call the trust communication continuum. That's a really fancy word. But essentially what this is spending less time in meetings, writing fewer status reports. And why is that? The more trust that you're building, the less time you have to spend communicating. And why is that? Like if there is a lack of trust, you end up in more meetings than you need to be in. If there's not enough trust between you and executives, or the executives don't trust the team, or this team doesn't trust you, they want all these status reports, weekly status reports. Please give us a weekly status report of where things are, that we know. Or the sales team, when are we going to deliver this? We need a status report on it. So if you're not building trust, you're going to end up spending a lot of your time communicating. Someone asked me a question a few meetups ago when I was presenting about, I'm spending a lot of time in meetings, with my engineering team, with this team, with that team. How do I get out of that so that I can actually be doing product work? And my question, my answer or question back to them was, how much time are you spending in building trust with that team so you don't have to be in those meetings, so you can do your product work? And that's what led me to think about this sort of graph, which was the more trust you have, the less time you have to communicate. And it's not that you're not communicating with people, it's just the kind of the wasteful communication that you would need because you don't have trust. All right, so we've talked about trust. So let's go and talk about the four spokes of this flywheel. So one of the things that is really critical to understand, I've talked about collaboration in a broad way, I've talked about trust in a broad way, but a really critical part about understanding collaboration is that each team that you're working with is like a different person. They're a different persona, or they have different interests, they have different needs, they have different goals, and so it's really critical for you to understand like what that team is about, to understand how best to collaborate with them. And so there's just these four questions or four words that I have on here, which is, what is the team that you're working with? What are they comprised of? What are they responsible for? Who is part of that team? Who's responsible for them? Who should you be interacting with? Why is it important to collaborate with them? I think that's the most critical question, and we'll spend a little time talking about that because I think that's the most important one. And how is the best way for you to collaborate with them? What are effective means of doing it? Like with the technical lead, it was getting up on a whiteboard. With the marketing team, it might be a different way. So what are those things that help you? So let's pause over here, and I'm going to get some audience participation. Let's pick that question, why? Why is it important to collaborate with some of these teams? Let's pick the sales team. Like, why would you think it's important to collaborate with the sales team as a product manager?
They know the messaging that is going to turn someone into sales. They know what stuff is hidden, what things matter,
Yeah.
And what's going to cause the buyer to go ahead. So,
Great. They really understand the buyer and what things resonate with them. Good. Anyone else?
Close relationship with customers, and basically they know what somebody is interested in buying.
Yeah. So they have a good relationship with
Right.
customers and prospects. So that's an important one. Go ahead.
So that the SaaS team knows what they can expect to ask on a certain delivery day, so they don't make false commitments.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't want, you don't want them to be selling things that you don't have yet. So it's really important to have that connection with them. What else? We'll take one more. We'll pick another team. Go ahead.
They should have some sense of the competitive threat. They should be hearing it from customers.
Yeah, they're talking to customers. The customer's saying, I'd rather use this product. That's great information. Great information for a product manager. Okay, let's pick on another team. Let's pick on executives. Why is it important to collaborate with executives? This is a loaded question. Go ahead. You got to have their buy-in. Well, why do you have to have their buy-in?
Because they're ultimately going to fund the business.
Yeah, exactly. It's a critical part of them getting behind whatever you're working on. Great. What else? Yeah, the long-term vision of the company. And there's some back and forth that has to happen there. They have a vision, but there's a product vision as well, and how do those things align? That's a great one. Thank you. Others?
I'll just mention because it's the theme of the night, but
Yeah. So if you don't understand the company's strategy and your product might be out of alignment with it, that's going to be a problem. Alex.
They can be a champion for you and your product when you're not around.
That's great. Yeah. They're meeting with large customers or they're at conferences, and if they can be a champion for your product, that's a good one. Go ahead.
If there's a major change, they tend to know before you do.
Yeah.
Give you a heads up.
So a change in the market or big change that's
Or
happening.
within the company,
Or within the company.
acquisitions, or sales, or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. That's a good one.
I was going to say, we talked about sales. It might be good to have sales and execs kind of be on the same page.
Yeah.
Because execs may have one idea of what we need to sell, but salespeople are trying to sell something else.
Yes. Yes.
And product can get caught in between.
Great. So you can see that, understanding, like you brought together sales and executive, but they're different, they're different groups and they have different interests and they bring you different things that really help you become effective in your role. And so it's really critical to understand each of those roles, and why it's important to be collaborating with them and how it leads to your product success, how it leads to a good product strategy. So I'm gonna leave you with 4 key takeaways. One, how important it is to align teams around a product strategy and around the product that you're working on. The second one, I talked about continuous collaboration and how critical that is. And when I use continuous, it means that all these teams often early. I talked about trust and why that's critical and how that helps you get better at the product work that you're doing. And then the last one is how these teams are unique and thinking about each of those teams and how you're collaborating with them and doing it in a way that is aligned with their interests is really critical to having product success. All right. So thank you. You can find me, rshirazi@gmail.com. You can find awesomedop.com or the newsletter. But thanks for your time, and I'll hand it off to Rajesh. Who I think is next, or Tanja, you're next. Okay, great.
Thank you. Okay, is it working?
Yes.
Are we all good?
Good.
If it stops working, you'll let me know. And I can project just as loud as well. So welcome, thank you. I hope you met a new best friend while you had a moment to introduce yourselves. I am Tanja Horan. I am the principal with Tacosa 360 Consulting, specializing in product consulting. So assisting organizations that are getting ready or need to go from growth and scale, from the product strategy, the product marketing, as well as the product management, and to help mature them in that respect. A little bit just about my background to give you an idea. I have been and worked technology primarily, my entire my career, primarily in SaaS, although I did do some enterprise, working in AI, ML, health and wellness, fintech, CPG, as well as some of the government entities as well. Exciting times. I left with one of the SaaS companies that I worked with, actually went to transaction, which was fantastic to be able to go through that, to be acquired. And I was leading product at the time, so I got to be part of the presentations to the different buyers and do all of the due diligence. And that's actually what later inspired me to go to graduate school and get my MBA. I'm really curious here this evening, how many of you are with startups? Okay, a handful. So, wow, that's phenomenal. So we're more majority of you with more mature, older companies. Okay, that's great. Well, welcome. For this evening, what I want to talk to you about, this is entitled, Where Road Will Your Product Strategy Take You? And specifically as how it will relate to both your long-term and short-term roadmaps. What we talk about specifically is about managing through uncertainty and what that looks like in your product strategy. And how, as you look out further out in your product roadmap, how do you manage it? And more importantly, not just managing it in terms of delivery, but also those communications. And how do we make that clear for everyone so that you can execute successfully and bring the product to market for that. So first, let's take a look at the roadmaps. We have a number of product managers I know in the room. How many of you are in charge of actually creating the roadmap? Okay. How many of you are communicating it externally outside of your organizations? Okay, so we've got a mix here for that.
one thing I want to start here and talk about first is about the long-term roadmap and what its purpose is. Okay, the main purpose of the long-term roadmap is to be able to tell stories. Okay, it is a vision. It is about what you're doing and why you are doing it, and it helps align both internally as well as externally what you're doing for the market. It can be also used because has anyone ever presented to analyst, market analyst, in Gartner, and gone through that process, which is quite interesting to be able to present to them. But really, what they're looking for a lot of times is a story and the vision of where you're going. Okay, it's not as much as important what I'm doing right now, although they will rate you on it. It's really about that story and helping managing that where you're going. Where your short-term roadmap is really the vision and perspective of how am I actually going to do it, right? Now, if your vision is to be able to go to a new market segment, to be in the cutting edge, perhaps that, since some of us have presented to Gartner, if we want to go in the Magic Quadrant, all familiar with the Magic Quadrant? Everybody wants to be up in that upper right-hand corner, but your short-term roadmap is really going to be the one that's going to tell you how to do it and how you're going to be able to execute. But the thing about the short-term roadmap, you can basically, at that level, in those steps, only get as far and truly vision about 12 months ahead of time. Okay. Much further than that, it gets a little murky because there are things that are, quite frankly, out of control, and there are changes that will happen along the way. But with that, and with their uncertainty, there are certain fallacies that are out there about what roadmaps are and what they represent that they have to manage. I don't know about your experiences, but in my experiences, roadmaps, because of these fallacies, are some of the most complex that you will have and you will encounter in trying to manage, right? Everyone seems to think, how many of you have ever thought that if once you publish a roadmap, it's locked and loaded? I can tell by the chuckle that that's true. There's a perception. If it's not by the product people, it's all the people that you'll interface with for that. The other one out there is that we're going to have absolute precision. Okay. How many of you are in tech companies? Okay. Anyone in non-tech? Okay, we got a couple. What industry are you in?
Financial services.
Financial services? Health. Okay. Interestingly enough, some people seem to think once you, and I'll talk about publishing dates, but once you get a horizon, we know exactly, and there will be no change, and we will never encounter any change. I want to share something with you that I thought was brilliant, because who has ever had a little pick on sales? Since we seem to be the theme of picking on sales this evening, pick on sales for a moment. Anyone ever had sales come to you and tell you, you need to tell me exactly when it's going to release? Raise your hands. Yes? Pain. Okay, so then you will really appreciate this particular thing. I wish I had been brilliant enough to actually have to come back for this, but it did actually happen. It was a conversation between the head of sales and the VP of engineering. And the head of sales came to say, you need to tell me exactly when that release is going to go. Okay, I need to know the specific date. The response actually back was, all right, I will tell you that if you will tell me in the sales pipeline exactly, specifically what date that contract will sign. Okay? Isn't that fabulous? I really wish I could take credit and I can't. But it's the same thing. Anyone who looks at the sales pipeline, there are so many things that could happen. Absolute precision is not part of it, but it's something that we have to be able to manage through. Also, the fact that it's a day commitment, right? And that once we go out there, it's an absolute day commitment. And I'll talk a little bit about disclaimers later on. And that we're only supposed to review it annually, right? Probably, how many of you review your roadmap more than annually? Are you quarterly? Okay. Anyone more frequently than quarterly? How often do you do it? Monthly. Okay, fantastic. Anyone else? Right. There seems to be sometimes that we're only supposed to be. I'm glad to see that that's not the case here this evening. That we only review it annually. A lot of times, right before we do fiscal planning and budgeting, we'll review so we can do our things in the future. We may know that, but a lot of the organization, because they think it's locked and loaded, we only have to do it annually, and we should be doing it more often. So with that, we got all these fallacies, right? And things and people that we have to be able to manage through with our strategy. But one of the challenges is that the roadmap has ambiguity automatically built into it. I really like this particular model, the cone of uncertainty, to be able to say, what I can really see clearly is right here now in front of me. Okay, that's why we can only really effectively predict out to about 12 months, rolling 12 months. But as we get further out, it becomes blurry with that. I had a CEO that I worked with that really said, he has a product background, and you know, he said a lot of people think that the road of that roadmap is linear and it's straight, where in actuality it's going to undulate, right? And it was a great visual to understand where we're going to be going, but there are multiple paths. We're going to get there, but there are things that are influencing exactly what we're doing, that ambiguity. What is changing? So it is an ever-changing environment that we have to continually monitor. The fact that you monitor monthly was great, but at least quarterly. The competition, what are they doing, right? Are they about to come release something new that will be, that will cause, you need to rethink what's happening to them, because they will actually take your sales away from you. What is the product feedback that you're getting? Are you, is it resonating? Are we needing to change? If you're doing the product marketing, is the messaging off that we need to be looking at and being able to pivot? Sales, what is happening in sales, right? What does that pipeline look like? What is that influencing? And lastly, I bring in scale in particular because with those, since most of us here are tech, how many know how far you can scale and where you will break? You know. Does anyone not know? Know your capacity. Okay. That's a very good thing, and where sales in particular and monitoring sales becomes important, in that you need to be thinking of scale and thinking of scale ahead of time, and having that already built into your roadmaps as well. So with an ever-changing roadmap, we need to be able, in an environment, we need to be able to adapt with that. Hence our chameleon would tell us we need to adapt. However, chaos will adapt does not mean that you get to change every minute, right? That will just wreak havoc and chaos within the organization and what you're trying to deliver into product. When you're going to run into issues, and maybe some of you have experienced in particular, but things to look out for, are if your vision is constantly changing. Okay. If you're constantly changing, or you've got shiny object syndrome. How many of you have experienced shiny object syndrome? Right? Who's causing it? Executives. Mm-hmm. What's driving them? Do we know? Competition will drive them. Customer pressures, especially if you've got large ones in particular. That is something, if we're constantly changing the vision, and if you're in startups, that means most likely you haven't found your product market fit yet. That's time to take pause, right? And make a lesson, you know. When I work with organizations, especially when you're working with the other stakeholders in the organization, they think if you can adapt, then they can change all the time. But what they realize is it's actually counter to what we're trying to do. If you're reacting versus responding, right, it will cause a problem with what you're trying to achieve. And so that you need to take pause and make sure that you're making the right decision if we're going to go ahead and adapt our roadmaps and communicate that. If we're solely date-driven, who here has been involved that's ever been told that they had to actually deliver by a certain date? How'd that feel? Yeah, I've been there too. It's not the best place to be, but that will wreak havoc in our organization. It helps to communicate with others what it should be. The other one is when we have unaddressed scale, because that will force us into a reactive mode to what we're doing. With that, we do need to adapt, but we just need to be aware of what and how we need to adapt our roadmaps and their communications for that. First part of doing that is to anticipate the change that is coming. Understand where you could have opportunities where things won't go that well. If you are expecting sales, how many of your sales teams are selling ahead? Anyone selling ahead? Okay. Understanding what those deals are and when they will close really quickly. But being able to, another key thing is to look when you're planning, pull back some of your capacity. How many of you are holding back capacity? Or how many are at like 100% planning? A little bit? Yeah. So a little bit in order to be able to make that connection. Position the unknown. Do we communicate part of that positioning the unknown as proactive when we're communicating our roadmaps, and so that they are aware of where the risks are? That's extremely important to our executive teams, where they may not be aware they're too high up, and not understanding where we could have a failure or a change, whether that be in the technology itself, whether it could be in the delivery, where you are with your teams, what the capacity and the resources for them, what the market is looking at. We know that the competitor is about to happen, but position that unknown. When you communicate your roadmaps externally, especially externally, important to put the disclaimers at the bottom. Okay. Do you put the disclaimers at the bottom of your roadmaps right now? Yeah. So they're subject to change so that they're positionally only for what they are, so that we know that ahead of time. That is probably one of the hardest things that I have experienced, to be able to get account management and sales to understand, to be able to handle that. A lot of times, if possible, is to be able to have product present the roadmap for you, so that they can see it, so they don't overpromise for that, and to be able to do that. And the other last component of it is to be able to manage that uncertainty, is to tell them the storytelling of where you're going, so they don't make it up, because they will if you don't tell them where it's going. Has anyone ever had to go through replatforming of their solution? How much did you get to be able to bring out new to market when you did? 0. Okay. I've been there as well. And I tell you something about storytelling and the roadmap. One of the things that I learned really quickly, and it was a lesson to be learned, we went through replatforming. We could not scale. That was the main reason before it. It was taking thousands of hours to be able to onboard at a particular SaaS company that I worked for. It wasn't efficient. The solution, it really looked, quite frankly, like Excel on steroids, but in the cloud, sort of. Kind of worked, a little clunky, but not efficient at all. So we chose to make the strategic decision to be able to grow, to go ahead and replatform, so that we could do it and build all of the administration tools. As a result, we didn't bring anything to market for about a year. One of the things that we probably didn't do well is we actually didn't tell the customers what we were doing. Okay, and as a result, they were getting a little antsy because our competition was on our tail, quite frankly, and they were going through and saying, well, what about this button? And what about this capability? And they couldn't understand why we weren't getting something new. And we learned pretty quickly that wasn't the right approach, is not to tell them at all. But really to go forward and say, paint a vision for them, right? They really wanted to be our customers. They actually didn't want to leave, right? But we were at risk of churn if we didn't actually tell them what we were planning. They didn't. And that was the lesson for me. The timing wasn't important to them as much as the fact of knowing that it would be coming, right? And how we were going to work it. And I still remember her name was Bev, and I told her the story, and I printed this picture, and I couldn't give her any dates because I didn't know it, and I was nervous about doing that, quite frankly. And she goes, oh, okay, I'm okay, this is great, I'll be your partner, and we'll be able to move forward. So it's really important that those in managing uncertainty and what you know is to be able to paint that story for them going forward. And a lot of times, especially externally, you don't have to give them dates. You just need to give them broad strokes of horizon, which will allow you to be able to navigate in between. The other component, because we went back to our fallacy that it's locked and loaded, is to remember that it is a living document and it can be updated within reason for you. To be able to show your strategy if you need to update that strategy change in what you're doing. But one of the things is to be aware of the anchoring bias. And if it's not with you, the fact that it's surrounding. Who's familiar with what anchoring bias actually means? What is it?
So when you have knowledge of something, you try to confirm this existing knowledge, and if you are looking for the other knowledge that will confirm your theory.
That is a bias, definitely. And to elaborate on that, so anchoring bias, when you put out the dates, is that is the number. So if you go think of it in terms of who's ever negotiated for a job in a salary, what's the first thing you're probably not supposed to do? Throw the first number, right? Because that's what they're going to anchor on. And when you want to navigate that, they're like, what you told me. So you need to be aware of that. The other component of it is being also aware of those, of the confirmation bias that is out there. And the confirmation bias is the one that will tell you that I made up this roadmap, I did this plan, I'm gonna find every reason for it to be true, the way that I planned it, because I can't be wrong, right? And so you're gonna find ways, and that's another way that you can throw your strategy off balance and what you're trying to achieve if you're not aware of that. And just be aware of that when other people are talking to them so you can navigate that with them and help them understand. The one is also to monitor the sales pipeline. Okay, how many of you actually have access to the sales pipeline that you're seeing? Okay. If you don't, I highly would recommend that you find a way to actually see it. Because it will tell you a lot of what's coming down the pipeline, right? Whether it's a scale situation that you need to do, whether you've sold ahead and you're not quite ready for whatever capability got promised, and you need to adjust and be able to make that change for that delivery. But be able to do that and see what sales is doing, also to make sure that they didn't sell something that you don't do or you don't plan to do. For that, it's really key to making sure that you've got the most updated document and can adjust and adapt. And the last here is the integrate feedback loops, right? Which is, I heard one of the companies here was really trying to integrate voice of customer, but you need to be able to have those feedback loops and being able to take that and have some flexibility in order to change that so that you continually can continue to get your vision, but being able to do that effectively for that. And one thing I will just tell you, just one more story that I actually did do. With that, because of the bias in this planning, we had planned, we had this fabulous strategy. I mean, everything was aligned and everything was supposed to be delivered. And we got 6 months into it, because it was a new company. So building a roadmap for them was brand new. We got 6 months into it and there were some changes, the way that we were selling and what we were selling. And I looked at the roadmap and I called a timeout. I'm like, this doesn't make any more sense. We need to change it if we're going to align. If this is really where we think the line of business is going to be moving, we need to do it, and I need to do it now for that. And so we did for that. So with that, just to recap here, review your roadmaps at least quarterly to be able to know when you need to adapt. If you're doing it more often, that's great. But at least quarterly, because you need to give the teams the lead time in order to make the change. Foresee the impact that you're going to have and know what your trade-offs are so that you can make those adjustments and you can actually respond without reacting. And take control of your story and make sure that the externals will know, because being able to do that and manage that for them help make you more successful in your actual delivery moving forward. Oh, I pushed the wrong button. And so I have landed right on time like I'm supposed to. I'd love for you to connect. Feel free to reach out to me and we'll talk later. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try mic-less. Y'all raise your hand, especially in the back if you feel like you can't hear me. So I'm Rajesh Nerlikar. I am a product advisor and coach at a company called Pkwy. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my story, partly because it sort of helps explain the framework, which is called Vision-Led Product Management. We just released this a few months ago. Kind of encapsulates all of our best practices that we use when we're coaching clients on product management. And you know, we focus a lot on product vision and strategy. Another big thing we do is product team development. So that's like hiring and coaching. And then we also look at sort of processes, like what it takes to ship the org. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to introduce the framework, and then I want to present it with an example so that it kind of comes back down to earth. Don't want this to feel like a lecture necessarily on the framework itself. So like many people here, I went to UT, I did engineering. I wasn't sure that like chip design was the right thing for me, and so I did a minor in business, and I went to go work at Accenture for 5 years here in Austin afterwards. Half of that was as a software engineer and architect in the government practice, and I found myself kind of more interested in understanding why clients were asking us to build the software we were building than actually building it. So I transitioned into a business analyst role about halfway through my time there, and that was kind of my first step into product management. So I've been doing it for more than 15 years. Wasn't sure that consulting was the right long-term thing for me, and so I went to business school up at Michigan to try to transition into the world of startups. My first year, I worked at a student-run startup called Hitchers. It was a ride-sharing service. We got acquired a couple years after graduation. So it was really cool to see sort of that experience. My second year, I started a company with a classmate of mine called Terra. We were trying to encourage people to make sort of environmentally conscious decisions on a daily basis. I spent about a year and a half running that company. We built a product that was a Facebook app that lets you see how your energy usage compared to your friends and family. Tried to sell it to utility companies, tried to sell it to home energy professionals, and then I got engaged and realized that a salary would be really nice at that point in my life. And so I moved out to Washington, D.C. to become a product manager at a startup that was doing something very similar in the energy efficiency space called O-Power. And I kind of lucked out, so I didn't know what product management was until I started looking for jobs, and I was like, oh, this sounds like something that's interesting and like what I've been doing. And I lucked out, so the VP of Product and Design at O-Power was Ben Foster. He was actually hired by Marty Kagan back in the day at eBay, and so he brought a lot of sort of Marty Kagan product management out to DC. He brought it to O-Power, and I didn't know it until later that I kind of grew up under the Marty Kagan school of thought. So it was about a year as a product manager, a year and a half maybe at O-Power. Pre-IPO, we went public about 5 years ago. But what I found was that most people who we were sending our energy reports to like try to encourage them to save energy at home, were actually doing so because they're trying to save money and not so much because they cared about the environment. And so I went to go join another startup in DC to kind of tackle the financial wellness challenge that sort of like exists here in the US. And so that company was called Hello Wallet. I joined as a senior product manager. We got acquired about a year after I joined by one of our investors, Morningstar. So I ran product management after the acquisition for about a year. And then I moved out to Chicago to join Morningstar for a couple years, kind of more in the enterprise space. And so during that time, I was managing a $40 million portfolio with a team of about 20 people. Product management, product operations, and technical project managers. What I found after I got to Chicago was that I missed the startup world, and so I started advising companies on the side. At 1871, it's a little bit like Capital Factory down here. Really enjoyed it, and so a couple years ago, we decided to move back to Austin to be closer to friends and family. And I left Morningstar and moved back out to Ben Foster, who had basically retired the day of the O-Power IPO and started doing some product advisory and like coaching work just to kind of get back to the tech community. So he had been doing it for about 4 years. Ended up being like really good timing. He was actually thinking about joining one of his clients as a full-time chief product officer. So I took over the practice last year. And in that time, I've now advised about 20 companies. And collectively over the past 5 years, Ben and I have advised 55 companies. We've probably talked to more than 200 at this point. about the product challenges, and as you might imagine, we start identifying some patterns, and so I wanted to talk about some of the common scenarios we see, because it sort of helped inform and shape the vision-led product management framework. So the first scenario is what I call uber agile, right? We're super flexible, we're gonna listen to our customers, and we're just gonna build the right thing, give them the right moment, right? And so this looks a little bit like this. My roadmap is sort of like tied to some business outcomes. Like the big feedback loop here is, are we generating revenue? Is NPS going up? Or is MAUs going up? Are people opening emails? Like all that stuff, right? One thing I'll note here, like Tanja was talking about the shiny object syndrome, right? This roadmap gear is not pinned in place. And so it can move around wherever you feel like you need to go, right? But what happens often is that then just generates a lot of whiplash for the team who's like trying to go through this, right? So totally appropriate probably for a brand new product that you're getting out into market, but maybe not so much for like more mature products. And yet we see this pretty commonly. The second one scenario that we see a lot is what I call the disconnected vision. So now there is a vision, and it's something that I see a lot with founders at startups. They have this idea of what they think they need to build out in the world, and it's in their head, and they've talked enough internally that they think that everyone understands it, but nothing's ever been written down. And so the vision, yes, it exists in a few people's heads. There's probably different interpretations of it, and it's disconnected from the roadmap. So the product team is over here like doing this stuff, and the vision's like over here, right? But still, everything is tied to sort of the business outcomes, and so that's another common scenario that we see. The next one is what I call the disconnected strategy. So in this scenario, there actually is a strategy that the executive team is out there sort of like talking about, but it's still disconnected, right? So they're out there talking to investors and customers, this is what we're gonna do, here's how we're gonna achieve this stuff, and yet here the product development squads are kind of like wrestling with production issues and tech debt. They're trying to address like customer feedback sort of requests, and it's all disconnected, right? And so I think, it feels like everyone sort of defines strategy. I think I have a third definition now of what strategy means. To me, strategy is the thing that's sort of like path to going from where you are today to realizing a vision for where you want to be. And that's like sort of the definition. And so what we've sort of noticed here as we look at these common scenarios is like, what's conspicuously missing from all of them? Anyone? Feedback, customers, yes, the customer, right? And to me, I think the biggest risk as product managers is that because we're in an office with our colleagues every day, that we end up optimizing our product to keep our colleagues satisfied, sort of at the expense of making sure that we're building something that our customers want and care about. And so, with the vision-led product management framework, what we've done is we've basically added sort of that major component in there, right? So obviously up here at the top left, the gears are connected so that the vision is holding the gears in place. You can't just like move around. And the strategy then is connected to your roadmap, and I'll talk more in detail about sort of how that connection happens. But the roadmap is changing the thing that the customer cares about, right? No customer cares about your NPS or your MAUs or your ARR, to be perfectly honest, right? They care about what is my experience with your product and your company, and is it delivering value to me? Is it delivering some of the outcomes that I care about? And if you have a reasonable business model, if you deliver those customer outcomes, then you should be able to deliver some of the business outcomes that all your stakeholders care about. And so, the idea here is like we're introducing the customer centricity, as well as using the vision to help ground sort of the day-to-day work that might be happening in the near term. So the key concepts really in the framework are these. First is that we use these outcome metrics, not only for your business. Everyone knows that there's something with a dollar sign in front of it that you're trying to accomplish. We start to get over here into the customer space and say, like, what is the thing that they care about achieving in their life? Why is it important to them? How do they measure success themselves? So we start by identifying some of the outcome metrics. Then we think about, okay, if this is the thing the customer cares about, how do we 10x that number for them, right? And I just use 10x in that like sort of general sense. So how do we deliver incredible value to them along this dimension that we believe that they care about, or hopefully that they told us is the way that they measure success with the product. And that vision isn't just a list of product features. It is a vision for what the customer experience will look like 2-3 years down the road. Like time horizon varies depending on where you are in the company life cycle, but it is a customer journey vision. It is not about just your product and the features. And I'll talk a little bit about more what I mean by customer journey. Then we work backwards to create what we would call a strategic plan, which is, what is that pathway to go from wherever we are today to realizing that vision? What are the major milestones or stepping stones we need to get over? What are the major changes we need to make to our product to realize that vision that we believe is something our customers will care about? And then finally, there's sort of like a balancing act, right? It's not like you can dedicate 100% of your roadmap to this vision and like forget about like performance and security and tech debt and customer requests and all the things that sales is asking for. So there's a balancing act that has to happen, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to create that balanced roadmap. And then finally, in the part of the process I mentioned, we kind of look at like the execution side. How does product get shipped? I'm not going to talk about that box today since we were talking kind of at the higher level of product strategy, but I do want to provide like some more details on each one of these, the 4 boxes up top. So starting with outcome KPI pyramids. The general idea here, we use a pyramid format for a few reasons. There's a key outcome at the top. You can break that outcome down almost like a math equation into like sort of like different levels, leading indicators here in the middle. And then at the bottom are the metrics that you would use to measure sort of like customer behavior within your product. Are they clicking? Are they opening? Are they logging in? Those types of things. We use the pyramid visual for a few reasons. One, it forces teams to identify the relationship between KPIs. I've seen like probably 3 or 4 dashboards where it's like literally 40 metrics that are all moving in different directions, and it's like kind of hard to tell. Is anything going right or not? And so it forces that. It also helps you hopefully minimize the number of KPIs because like they're stacked on top of each other, and hopefully you don't end up with 40, but maybe you end up with maybe 10 or something like that. Or you might have 15 KPIs that all ladder up to a key outcome. One of the concepts here is also that there is an outcome for every sort of persona, right? Especially relevant in the B2B space where the buyer might be looking for one thing and the user is looking for something else. Or I've worked mostly in the B2B2C space where definitely the buyer is looking for something that hopefully the consumer also cares about, but like sometimes I found the mismatches there. And this was like, I'll happy to tell a story afterwards about Hello Wallet and where the major mismatch happened and how it sort of like hurt us come renewal time on the enterprise buyer side. So that's kind of a concept that there's a more one-to-one relationship between these outcomes and the personas that your product is built for. It's like, everyone's expecting something from your product. What is that key thing? So next we talk about like, okay, so I know that this is the metric of progress. This is a key outcome. Here are some of the KPIs that we'll use to measure whether we're delivering on that outcome. Then there's a question of like, how do I express what I want this sort of customer journey to look like? This is a visual I've done to sort of explain some different ways that I've seen out there of how teams might be expressing product visions. The 2 dimensions here are sort of like how visual is it on the x-axis, and then how detailed is it on the y-axis. And so, you might have, I'll talk about the customer journey story. It's basically like a document. Feature press release, you might have heard of Amazon doing this. They kind of write out what they want the press release to look like. I think design principles are really good. They help convey what are the key things of how we're going to design our product. There's a good example from Facebook where Zuckerberg kind of talks about the principles going forward after the sort of like privacy issues that happened last year or whatever that was. Product positioning statements, kind of a few sentences. There's Lean Canvas. There's a great example on the vision video side where Asana, like after they raised their Series B or something, put out this video of all the things they're going to build with that money, which is pretty cool. And then you'll notice the ones with the stars here. These are sort of our preferred ones for a couple of reasons. The Journey comic strip and then the mock-ups, mostly because they're highly visual and they're actually not that hard to create, even if you're not a designer. And so I'll show an example of a couple of these in a while. So the idea is you have a vision, and that vision is actually intended to explain what that customer journey looks like. And there are a few chapters that we use in this customer journey. You'll notice it's a loop. The idea is you start up here on the top right with a triggering moment when someone says, I don't think my current solution is delivering the outcome I care about. And so then they move into discovery where they start looking for better options out there, into evaluation where they're trying to decide, is it even worth trying some of these? Do they actually look better than my current solution? Over to the trial where they're like testing out, like kicking the tires around. And then into ongoing usage, which is where most product teams will like kind of operate, right? Like, do they log in regularly? Are they using the product? And then the loop starts over because at some point they might fall out of love with your product and they'll start wondering whether there's something better out there. And then the trigger is the thing that starts the whole cycle again, right? So the customer journey is broken out into these chapters, and I'll show an example of how to sort of express this vision in this customer journey format later. Then you kind of work backwards. So I have a vision of where I want to go. I have a starting point of where I am today. but you can go through effectively a giant story mapping exercise to say, what are the key milestones over some time horizon, probably 2 or 3 years for most companies, that I need to build things and release them. And so the idea behind these is you'll notice that across the top is the chapters of the journey. What are the things we need to change about different parts of our experience? And then there's milestones across the bottom, like kind of left side there, where we're sort of iterating and releasing new versions of different products. One thing you'll note here that this is actually a cross-functional roadmap that your entire company can sort of align around because it's focused on what the customer experience should look like. So you'll notice a color coding system here that marketing might be doing a lot in the discovery and evaluation side. Obviously, product will operate mostly in sort of that trial usage chapters. Customer success, probably heavily relevant in the sort of switching chapter, trying to make sure that people don't jump ship. And sales might be sort of in there too. So the idea is that this is a strategic plan that everyone can rally around, and everyone can kind of be aligned and make sure that everyone's moving in the same direction. Okay, so then I mentioned like you can't just then take this and all of a sudden like have like go work 100% on just that. So we think kind of about the 3 big buckets that most product teams we see are like sort of simultaneously juggling, rather than creating some framework where they have to like choose between them. We just said that there's a balancing act. These are 3 kind of swim lanes you can think of across your roadmap. There's strategic progress towards the vision, so I want to do these things, I want to get there. There's what we call optimizations, like minor tweaks to the existing product. You might be running some A/B tests to optimize conversion funnels, you might be fixing some bugs, you might be some production issues, those types of things. And then finally, what we call product hygiene. You can think of this as like technical stability, right? So it's performance, it's security, it's uptime, it is replatforming, those types of things for scalability. And the real tough choice to make then as a part of the product team strategy side is like, how much of our product development capacity do we dedicate to these 3 different buckets? And I've got some rules of thumbs. It largely varies by product lifecycle or like kind of product maturity. Early on, you're probably spending most of your time on a vision because there are no customers and there's no tech debt, right? You're just like trying to build something. And that slowly changes. And at some point, the product hygiene actually probably becomes a really big factor, mostly because of replatforming, right? Pretty much every 5 or 7 years, some product is going to have to go through like an evolution. And at that point, yeah, like we're replatforming. There's not much innovation happening in optimizations. We're not really making any progress towards the longer term vision unless the replatforming helps support that. So I'll talk a little bit more about sort of this as an example. But to do that, I'm going to introduce Chuckwagon, which is an example. How many of y'all cook at home? Okay. Chuckwagon is for you. So Chuckwagon is a product that is intended to help get home-cooked meals on the table. And so the first part, if you remember when we talked about this, was to identify what's the key outcome that customers would care about. In this case, the customer is a consumer, and the key outcome is all about how much time does it take me to get that meal on the table. And that time, you can break that down into how much time did it take me to plan the meals, and then how much time did it take me to actually cook them. If you break planning down further, it's how much time did it take me to like kind of finalize my meal plan, and then how much time did it actually take me to get the groceries I needed to make those meals. If you break cooking time down, it's like cooking and then it's cleanup. And then from here, you can kind of break it down further, right? And within the meal plan, there's an initial draft, and then I spend some time finalizing it. The grocery shopping, it's like the amount of time it takes me to get to the store, the amount of time I spend in the store, the time spent cooking, and like how much time am I like prepping versus actually cooking, and then like how much time is it actually taking me to clean up. Here you can tell that there's sort of a set of KPIs that like if you built the right features down there at the bottom, you might be able to get some proxy of how long things are taking. But the idea is to to reduce the amount of time spent on meals. So these are the KPIs. Now we started thinking about like, okay, how do I reduce the amount of time it takes by like 10x, right? How do I go from whatever 30 minutes to 3 minutes, or 1 hour or 2 hours down to like 30 minutes or 10 minutes, right? In this case, we kind of use the comic strip example. I'm going to sort of reveal these slowly, but the idea is that you remember back to the 6 chapters of the journey. There was a trigger, there was discovery, and evaluation. So here's the example with the Chuckwagon. The trigger is there's a mom, she spends a lot of time, and finally she gets frustrated about how long it's taking her to figure out what to make for the week for her family. She's on Pinterest, and she happens to discover Chuckwagon because someone wrote an article about how they're using this new product, and it's helped them save so much time in getting their meals on the table. And so she figures out what it is. She goes to the website, she sees a bunch of 5-star app reviews as part of the evaluation chapter, and she decides to give it a try. Next, she gives it a shot. She's really happy at how fast she's able to generate the first meal plan. And she says, this is a pretty cool product. I think I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to try it for a few more weeks. During those weeks, she starts rating the meals. The personalizations get better, so her meal plans get better, more attuned to what's going on in her family. She tries out the grocery delivery service, which Pkwy offers. And then at some point, for a special occasion, she actually tries out the chef who comes and makes the meal plan for her, so she doesn't have to spend a bunch of time doing that. And then there's a little switching chapter here. She goes on vacation, and someone from Pkwy says, hey, is everything okay? We haven't seen you using our product in a while. And she says, yep, it's all good. And so, this is just a vision of like what that experience would look like. Hopefully you can tell that some of the value here is that it's pretty specific, right? And not because this is exactly the right thing to build, but it helps rally the team around sort of that long-term direction because you can start imagining things. To supplement this, we also went ahead and did all the mock-ups. And so with meal planning, you can tell us about your household. You tap one button and then we generate a meal plan for you, and then within a week you can sort of like edit those meals. You can replace them, you get a chance to look at them. You can delete one if you guys are going to go out to dinner or whatever it is. Within grocery delivery, once you have that meal plan, you can hit another button and it'll generate a grocery list that says these are the things you need to buy for the meals you want to make this week. There's a checklist that you can take to the store and make sure you haven't forgotten anything. And then finally, there's the call to action, which is around like, how do I actually get these groceries to my door without having to go to the store? And so there's an integration with the grocery delivery service. And then finally, you have the ability, after you've ordered your groceries, there's a call to action to actually have a chef come deliver these groceries to you. So this is the vision. Now you can kind of think back to the strategy piece, which is like, how do I work backwards from that? Well, there's basically a pretty specific strategy here for Pkwy. The general idea first is to get consumers using the product. Real recipe plans is sort of that thing, the one-tap meal plan for the week. It's differentiating in the market, it saves a lot of time. The idea there is to get enough consumers that you could then approach the grocery delivery services and say, would you do an integration with us? And now you can add the grocery delivery feature set. And then now that you have a finite number of recipes that people are making, you can have chefs and operationalize them. And so these are sort of like the 3 strategic milestones for Pkwy in order to realize the vision of like saving Americans millions of hours when it comes to getting meals on the table. To supplement that, we also identify a few metrics to help measure progress along the way. You notice ARR there, and then you kind of notice a reference back to the KPI pyramid of like, this first milestone is all about saving time in the planning phase, then the grocery shopping, and then finally in the cooking phase, right? And so then there was a question of like, how do I actually build a roadmap off of this? We always start these types of things with a reminder to our stakeholders of where we are in the big picture. We're kind of here in milestone 1. And so this is a roadmap template that we use pretty often. You can tell here, it builds on the sort of 3 buckets model. So you use strategic progress, which is going to be about 60%, optimization is tech debt. It also calls out who's the persona and what KPI are we trying to drive with some of these roadmap initiatives. Across the top, uses more of a Kanban view, sort of like every idea we go through like sort of the backlog planning phase, alpha, beta. You can kind of think of these as discovery versus delivery, and then into general availability. I probably don't have time to go into the details here. I'll figure out how to get these slides to y'all if you want to look at them, but these are the different features. The only thing I'll call out there is like, look at the dotted line that has the buffer, right? Like not everything has to be like well planned out. Sometimes things are going to pop up, right? And so that is like the concept of vision-led product management. I know I talk fast. It's because I lived on the East Coast for a few years. But if you do want to stay in touch, please do. Here's my email address, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Thank you all.
More presentation, right, Rajesh? And you could just go ahead and do that. Let's start thinking about what, everything you've heard. You got to digest a little, and then what kind of questions you would have for our guest here. One question is, well, you talked about the business objectives, and you get kind of your company's business objective, and then there's a slew of problems that you believe could probably hit that objective, right? So up to all 3 of you, how would you go about ranking those, then vetting them, and how much time would you spend discovering which is the best bang for the buck, where should my team start first, etc.? Any tips you would have for us?
Sure. So the question is mostly around like how do we stack rank solutions to achieving goals?
Yeah, make sure we hit the right one first.
Yeah. It's a hard one. the core of product strategy. There's a couple things I normally look at. So I've got a scorecard that I use just to like get things started in sort of a quantitative fashion. Kind of looks at sort of like the importance of like a particular outcome. Okay, you can think of this as like how painful is the existing like solution, or like how painful is the problem for a group of customers. I think obviously, are they paying for an existing solution? That can score better because like you have a chance to still share probably, and then looking at the satisfaction with those existing solutions, right? So it's like important, it's painful, it's urgent, they're paying for it, they're not happy with whatever they have. Sometimes those are helpful ways to identify like where the opportunities lie.
Another common framework that maybe you have come across called RICE, R-I-C-E, reach, impact, complexity, and I think the last one is effort. I might get that wrong, but you can search it up. But it's a good simple tool to sort of compare things against it. Reach is like how many people would this, how many customers would this actually help? Impact, complexity, effort. Those are all sort of common things to help you think through what would be more important than others.
I would agree with them. I think the other element that I consider too is the, for value-based criteria, is also the value to the organization. So the things that we need to think about in terms of our own operations, our own customer experience and support, and what that implication will be to the customers in their full experience with the product.
Awesome. Any questions from the group? Just a couple up here.
So my question is for Rajesh. Great presentation. Question for Rajesh. Great presentation, first of all. My question is, while I was going through your content, the content in the deck itself was so much to digest. When you're actually pitching to the customer, what's your experience in terms of their patience level, and also in terms of the money that is riding on while you're building this roadmap or going through the process of building the roadmap? How do you see that working as part of your experience?
Sorry, just to clarify, the question is around sort of how do you buy time to go do some of the vision work while your customers are asking for it?
Yeah, I mean, one is what I've seen with so I've done consulting as well as product with the company specifically. So what I've seen in consulting is customers lose patience quickly because they want to see things getting delivered. And when you are doing that discovery and framing with them, you start losing the patience and they feel that when am I going to get delivered some item before you're doing that discovery. So with this process that you were showing in, how was the experience and how do you deal with that?
So I run a one-day workshop is basically my answer, and it is a vision strategy workshop. There's a lot of pre-work that I ask the team to do beforehand, and they put together sort of a deck that everyone can come do. Most of the time, these are things that have been written down at some point in disparate ways, like market trends and like what metrics we think matter, what's the competitive landscape look like, those types of things. But sort of that's the way I do it, and so there's usually a kickoff workshop early on.
Yeah, so I was looking for more from the engagement model. So when you go to a customer from engaging perspective, how much time do you give to this before you have a roadmap ready for the customer?
Oh, gotcha. So to be clear, I just want to clarify. You're asking about sort of my interaction with companies. Right?
Yeah, I mean, looks like you've done multiple companies.
The reality is, I don't go to companies when they're launching new products with nothing from scratch. There is an existing product, there's an existing roadmap, there probably is an existing vision that just someone hasn't written down yet. So
I'm going to switch out mics.
Okay.
Any other question back there?
Yeah. Thank you very much, the panel. My question goes to Rajesh first. In terms of maybe traction, how much success, not like telling us the success rate internally, but using this kind of framework for the outcome KPI, what kind of success have you recorded in terms of number of products you've used this framework or practice to build?
Yeah, sure. We've probably worked with, like I said, about 55 companies. I don't know exactly the number. The outcome pyramids are actually relatively new. We just started using them earlier this year. So I'm guessing probably on the order of like 5 or 8. I will just tell you this on sort of the success. When I run those workshops, one of the things that's always surprising to me, and the reason we often start with the outcome KPIs, is we find that most of the roadmap debates stem from the fact that everyone has a different sense of what the metric or a metric of success. And if everyone at the executive level is talking past each other, guess what's going to happen down at the product manager and levels, right? No one's going to be aligned, and so it is largely an alignment exercise. And I'm often sometimes surprised at how many different answers I see when we go through the exercise for a few minutes, where everyone writes down what they think the key outcome is from a customer's perspective, how drastically different some of the answers are.
So how does this differ from the OKR?
Yeah, sure. So I think of the KPIs as sort of durable, right? They are metrics of success that probably shouldn't change very often unless there's some brand new customer insight that comes in that says, wow, we got this wrong. They actually care about this other thing, right? OKRs I see as a way of sort of operationalizing how you make progress on those, which is that you then set time-bound goals to move the needle on certain KPIs from the pyramid.
Regarding KPIs, how do you distinguish between vanity metrics and the legit ones?
Vanity metrics in terms of to make myself feel better? That we were successful?
Things that make you and basically numbers that make you look good but don't really contribute anything to the bottom line.
So one of the metrics, I guess, in that case would be the financial side, the actual one, to see how it is performing, and the ROI and the components to it. But that requires real transparency to what is happening for it and being able to identify it. That's an interesting story because stats can tell you anything. You can tell any story that you want. But I think it's really, you also need to get the real stats from the market itself and from your customers to know how it's performing and getting that feedback for you.
I think that sometimes is a reflection of an organization's culture and how transparent it wants to be about how they're actually doing, because you can make metrics look good in any way that you want it. You can make it look like it's going up and to the right. But an organization that really is being thoughtful about what actually matters will not spend time on vanity metrics. I mean, that's kind of a blasé answer, but that's, in my experience, the more honest an organization being with themselves, the less time they're going to spend on vanity metrics.
I think the most common one I see is logins, and I think that you have to look at your business model. Facebook, Google, they require lots of attention from consumers in order to have a business. But on the enterprise side, for example, I've got some clients and they started off with that, and I'd say, didn't someone buy this because they're trying to reduce the amount of time they're spending on this task in their job? And so logging into your product might be the opposite of delivering value to them because you're forcing them to come in. So I think it kind of comes back to the business model as well.
Sorry, just to kind of go along with that, with the KPIs, especially the ones you showed, Rajesh, do you ever use that as far as a value measurement, maybe the pricing or what your product should be?
Yeah, so I also do a lot of pricing work with teams, and so this is very helpful to say what are the dimensions upon which customers place value, so that your pricing model can also, if you want to use the value-based model, then your pricing can sort of follow suit.
We have a question here.
So when people ask me how I ended up in product management, I always just say I kind of stumbled into it. Curious to see what you guys think are the top 2 or 3 characteristics that you look for when you see someone who is or has potential to be a product manager.
Oh, a couple of different things. And actually I have an example because I hired someone who had no experience once, but she was very sharp and curious about wanting to learn and was willing to ask the questions and take the direction. Now that's a soft side, but that was really key to be able to understand the product. I think the other component is to be able to understand if they will also understand the business. So if you are in the technical side of it, A lot of times teams will focus purely within themselves on the technical side, but the business side is as much, if not as more critical in truly understanding, so the decisions that you're making as a product manager, you understand the implications to the actual business, which will only serve you better, especially if you want more funding, and other successes. So I look for both of those skill sets to be able, and as well as the drive.
Wow, I mean, I agree with everything that she said, because I was going to talk about curiosity, and I was also going to talk about like connecting with the actual business and what impact that you're having from the work that you're doing. So very aligned over here. I would add one other thing, which is learning. Like product management is a really hard job, and you're constantly having to learn. And if there's someone who's not passionate about that, that's then there's something missing. And I love this job because I'm constantly learning.
I think 100%. The one I would add is passion for sort of the problem you're trying to solve as well. Because product management is so hard and there's ebbs and flows, you better be really into whatever it is that you're trying to, like, whatever product, whatever solution your product offers in the world.
Reza, this is just a note. I really appreciate it from your side. When people ask me that question, I always say empathy, leadership, humility, and learning. Empathy, because you have to empathize with your engineers, the way they have to work hard for you, empathy for the customers, and then empathy for your internal stakeholders, because I think you hit on really well that it's to drive your vision and your strategy, you need to work well across others. So appreciated that. Where was the next question? There it is.
Hi, question is for Tanja. You mentioned some things about reacting versus responding. So how can you guard against, what are some indications that you're reacting versus responding, and then what are things you can do to help you not get to that point?
That's a great question. Part of that, in terms of managing it, and this will seem quite simple. For example, if you get a customer success to come down and tell you immediately that you have to change something immediately for a customer or you're at risk, take pause, okay? Ask them why. Ask them what the value is to the customer and what the risk is, okay? Because part of what you need to actually balance is the risk for that customer. If that customer is going to churn, that customer is a real big customer, and that, depending on how your portfolio is set up, needing to know that is really important. What I find a lot of times is when people want you to react right away, they haven't asked those questions, right? They automatically assume that, one, in that case, the customer knows exactly what they're asking for, and a lot of times, to be honest, they don't, right? And so you need to understand their objective to what they're doing. In terms of, proactively, reactive versus responding, part of that is to help train your organization the questions that you're going to ask them, right? So that when you're getting a request or feedback, you've already trained them and given them that says, you need to tell me what the objective is, what's really the business driver on their side, and that will take time. If it's not in your culture, quite frankly, it will take some time, but after a period of time, it should start to resonate, and that will help you be able to manage it.
So just to follow up on that, thank you for the slide where you talked about adapting, showing those 4 quadrants of different season. Sometimes we don't connect them, like things are changing. So how would you advise for a product team that maybe don't have visibility into the pipeline? What would you want to suggest in terms of, inviting that into the culture of the organization? Thank you.
So if you're in an organization that doesn't have that visibility yet, part of that is to build the relationships within the organization, right? So if the organization has been siloed, which most definitely happens, then some of the things that I've done in just to build the relationships and get the understanding. One, you can have, and I've done it on the financial side, but have someone come and do a lunch and learn. Come tell me about your business. Come tell me what you're seeing. In sales in particular, they've got a perspective you don't have. And if you will show them the respect that you don't know, but you want to know, everyone likes to talk about themselves. I mean, it truly is. It seems so simple, but it's a reminder to be able to do that. So if you will invite them, and I've done that, and I've done that with sales, and I did it even most recently with some salespeople, and the first thing he said to me is, talented salesperson, and he goes, thank you for just asking, right? Thank you for asking me. You know, he didn't really care what I did with the information. What he really cared about is that I asked. And I think that will give you a lot more insight and accessibility.
Great example of collaboration. It's awesome. That's a great story.
Tanja, something you had mentioned was sort of being prepared for all the different, the ever-changing environment, whether it's competition, sales, scale. So how do you balance a kind of a thoughtful amount of anticipation without going to over-preparedness for something that you can pop?
Great question on balance. I think part of that is to put some structure in mind of the key things that are important to you that you want to monitor in the competition. If someone's going to come out with a new product per se, and you need to be able to monitor that and see what's happening, or which ones are going to actually influence or impact you the most, right? And that's going to vary by company. Everybody's going to have a very different view. A lot of it will be common of what could impact them the most, but I would focus there so that you can manage your time the most. If it's the competition that is going to be there, if you know scale is an issue, which can, if you get caught in it, can actually have some ramifications across the board within the organization, then you want to pay a little bit more attention there. And then just monitor that over time. Because as you mature, or as that product matures and you learn more, where you need to keep that focus will change.
In one of your presentation, you had this cone of uncertainty, and my question is, how do typically executives look at those, especially if they are funding you for something that you want to build for them? What is their perception, and how do you explain them that, hey, there is uncertainty, but then we would try to get you to the vision that you're looking for, but it's a discovery process, and there is uncertainty to start with for certain. So how do you deal with that, or what's your experience with the execs especially?
That's a great perspective, because I think in some organizations, executives are blind to it, right? I mean, would anyone disagree? They are blind to it, and I think what part of is managing it is to also position for them that I recognize that this is an issue or this could be an unknown, but here's kind of a plan that I have to be able to mitigate that risk. Because what they're really looking for is for you to mitigate the risk. And you can tell them what you can deliver but to show progress, and then when the updates are going to happen, right? And what diligence that you're going to be doing to be able to answer that question for them, and what the impact is going to be. And start to prepare it so that they can understand that when you do come, it's not such a surprise, because that's what they react to. It's the surprise of what's happening, as opposed to that it actually happened itself.
We got time.
One more
Time for
question.
one more question. Did I see this side, somebody?
Everybody's quiet over here.
Yeah. Charles,
Okay, I
last
saw a
question
hand.
over there.
So it's really easy to come up with theories that you think are really great, and you're gonna think that whatever this feature is gonna be really valued in the market, and that people are gonna want to buy it, and it's gonna be great and gonna be wonderful, and why wouldn't it be? You and everyone you're talking to will agree it will be. But how do you take that hypothesis and really test it? Aside from, I mean, obviously talking to customers is helpful, but how can you really do some reality testing on your assumptions?
So I think there's a couple techniques. One thing I've started doing with clients is asking them to sort of think about the product marketing page. So like sketching out a landing page and actually doing some usability testing on that before you even build the feature. If you think it's going to drive new sales, and so like trying to gauge value that way. Or thinking about like where in the product, how would you introduce this new feature to an existing customer, and like putting that sort of a mock-up of that in front of folks as well. And I think the key thing there is just watching their faces, because it's like there's an emotional reaction that you can usually use to like gauge whether this is actually interesting or whether they're nodding their head because they're like doing a usability test with you and things like that. So I think that's one beyond sort of like traditional like, you know, A/B testing or rolling it out in alpha format, collecting feedback from like 5 or 10 people, and then like deciding whether you're ready to move forward.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is, you know, even before you know what that product is that you're trying to build, the type of user research that you're doing, and doing the user research in a very particular way, which is not around sort of reinforcing your cognitive biases, but in a very open-ended way where you're actually gleaning some insights that are around people's pains that you are not trying to confirm around a particular feature.
And I would just add, and I agree with them, and I would just add, it's a great opportunity if you have and can have a client advisory board, because then you can say you can position it and frame it, we're thinking about X, what would this mean to you? What would the value be to you? Before you even try to figure out how to solve it or what you would be bringing to market, because that will be able to help you understand whether, A, they care, and you should be able to go forward. The positive thing is that if they will value it, it's an opportunity to start the conversation as what does that value mean to you? And that's going to play into when you do your pricing, because you've already established that it's meaningful for them. And if it's a real big pain for them, that means you can charge more.
Thank you all. Give an applause.